Welcome to the third video of our hydropower series. This is the final video. In the first one, we talked about the resource of hydropower, the water cycle, the energy inherent in water held above the ocean. Then we talked about technology, dams, and run-of-river turbines, and how these things use water held above the ocean in order to extract kinetic energy and turn that into electrical energy. And we looked at the essentials of how those worked and even came up with a very basic model for how you would predict the power output from a dam based on the flow rate and the head, or the height difference between the water behind the dam and in front of the dam. So today in our final lecture, we're going to talk about utilization. We're going to look at the history of hydropower. We're going to look at how it's used now and some benefits and disadvantages. Okay, so we're going to start here with this image here on the left side of your screen. It's a little zoomed in and fuzzy, but it's a water wheel, and it's one that was built in the 11th century. I believe this is in Denmark, and this is, I think, just a recreation, but the point here is to show we've had water wheels around for a long time. In fact, water wheels have been used since the 4th century BC in Eurasia. The exact location of their first use is obviously debated by historians, just like everything else. Okay, so let's just look at a basic water wheel to get an idea of what's going on. We've got a shaft, which you can see right here, and around that shaft is a big wheel. And that wheel kind of has these, so you see that, oh, whoa, my bad. Okay, you see the wheel kind of has these buckets, I guess we'll call them. And so those buckets, I'll just draw roughly on our water wheel over here. So they just go around this wheel, and then coming in towards the top of our wheel and coming off the bottom, we have two things. We have the head race and we have the tail race. All right, so water comes in on the head race and it's elevated above the tail race, right? So this would be our head. And this water falls in to these buckets. And because these buckets are not aligned with the center, but are a little to the right of the center of the wheel, this means that the wheel is now heavier on this side. And so it starts, these have all been filled with water before, and this wheel starts to rotate this direction because there is a force pushing down on this right side. And as it rotates, this water here falls out into the tail race, and these buckets are now empty. And it's allowed to rotate and get filled again, and this is just a nice little cycle. And the water starts here at the head race and then goes down into the tail race. All right, and this causes a rotation of a shaft, and with a rotating shaft we have done many things in the history of humanity, including grind coal, we've pumped water, we've lifted rocks, we've done all kinds of things just by turning a shaft, and so this has been used for a long time. Okay, but the question is, when did we start using it to generate electricity? So here, this is a fancy castle in England, and you see here's a water wheel right here, and here is the dam that generates head, and this head turns this water wheel, and inside this building is a hydroelectric generating facility. So these have been used for a while. This generated electricity for a castle. In fact, the first hydroelectric dam came about in 1878 in England. And the first hydroelectric plant in the USA followed very soon after in 1881. And that was at Niagara Falls. Generally, these first projects were smaller kind of community projects. There was no grid back then. There was just a community that wanted electricity. They built a dam and a plant, and they got power. As we started to go national with our electricity, hydroelectric actually was kind of a leader in generating electricity. In fact, they called it white coal back in the day when it was very popular. In fact, in 1920, 40% of U.S. electricity was generated with hydro. Isn't that amazing? Let's talk about where we are at now. So this right here, this giant structure, let's change our color for this. We'll try yellow. This is the Three Gorges Dam, the biggest dam in the world. It generates 22.5 gigawatts of power. I mean, that's crazy. That's like, that could power California, essentially. This is in China, and it has a giant reservoir behind it. As you would imagine, as we build a giant dam, we get a giant reservoir. Other countries utilize a lot of hydroelectric power. For example, Norway and Paraguay. Remember in our first lecture we talked about you need mountains and you need water. Well, Norway and Paraguay have a lot of both of those, which means as countries they generate 85% of their electricity using hydro. Now that's impressive. Wouldn't that be nice if we did that in the United States? Well, the funny thing is, oh, sorry, I forgot to change my slide, so it didn't do that. Anyway, in the USA, we still generate a ton of power, 274 billion kilowatt hours of electricity just from hydropower alone. But unlike these countries, we use a lot of power in this country, which means hydroelectricity is only 7% of the total electricity that we use in the United States. Roughly 40 to 50% of the amount generated renewably, depending on the year. All right, so great, but not too great. As a last slide, let's talk about some benefits and disadvantages. All right, sorry about that. So benefits, one really nice thing. This I cannot stress enough. This is why hydro is not going to go away. Its capacity factor, 73%. This means the generators in a hydroelectric plant are operating at their maximum rated capacity 73% of the time. Compare this to solar or wind with very low capacity factors. Honestly, capacity factor is not a fair judge of the utility of solar or wind, but still, compared to the 10 to 20%, 73% is amazing. And that's because hydro has inherent, how do we spell that? Storage. Remember, we have a dam. Here's our dam. And what is behind that dam? A whole lot of water. And downstream is the rest of that water at a lower level. So we have stored head. We have stored energy. And the crazy thing, like we talked about in the very first lecture, where did this energy come from? It came from the sun. The sun made the water cycle happen. So this big body of water is stored solar energy that at any moment we can open the gate right here and let water through and use. That is amazing. We can't underestimate that. Okay, so our levelized cost of electricity for hydro is, oh man, sorry, I will fix that next time. 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Really good. Still beating solar and wind, but just barely. Okay, and like we just talked about, it is easily dispatched. Dispatched is the concept we were just talking about. Let's say the grid suddenly goes crazy. It's 5 o'clock. Everyone gets home. They're turning on Netflix. So they say, hey, we need a little bit more power. Well, all they got to do is open this gate a little bit more and you get more power. Compare this to a solar panel where the guy says, hey, we need more power. And the solar panels say, where's the sun? So, some great things about hydropower. There are, of course, some disadvantages, and they're kind of significant. All right, so first, financially, I mean, you're not going to build a giant rock in the middle of a river without spending some money. So it is a significant investment to build a large hydroelectric dam. But in today's day and age, perhaps even worse is environmental damage. Let's go back to the Three Gorges Dam, right? All of this did not used to be water. It used to be something else, and then it was water. And plants and the ecosystem do not like it when you change something that wasn't water into water. And so big dams cause a lot of problems. One, they change how land is used. Two, they change the run of the river, taking energy from the river and turning it into electricity. So you get silt buildup, you get these change in wildlife, you have heavier, you change even the amount of moisture in the air because you've created a lot of stagnant water. There are a lot of environmental problems associated with dams. This is possibly offset by microhydro, or little run-of-river projects that don't dam the river. However, they still take energy from the river and then still change the character of the body of water. Finally, there's not much remaining capacity. People would disagree with me on that. They'd say, oh, there's a lot of capacity. And I would say, yes, but a lot of it is locked away either in national parks or in places that are not accessible, or in places where the river, frankly, is not going to be dammed. And so those are the things holding us back from more hydro, and the things about hydro that are amazing. Hydro is a necessary part of any country's renewable mix. All right.